work?
Yeah.
It may be too small.
The clip's too small.
Okay, all right, well,
We try.
we'll do the best we can. But I do want to welcome all of you to Raleigh. As you know, this is our place of operation, as is most of state government here. There are a few boards, I think, that are scattered in other places. But we're glad to have you in town. I told Jamie and Dwight and some of them, Steve, a little bit ago, I'm obligated to take my 11-year-old son to the fair later this afternoon. So if any of you are staying in town, you may want to check that out. It's here, as they say, we used to have an investigator that somebody'd say something's not fair, and he said the fair doesn't come but once a year, and it's not in town now. So, so that was
that wasn't me.
That wasn't Tom, but Tom knows him. So that's but I always thought it was fun. But we were glad to host some of you over yesterday to visit the building. As I explained to some of the people there, believe it or not, the building's 13 years old now, so it's hard to believe we've been moved up the street that long, but we were glad that everybody could stop by and have a look. And as Jamie said, most people don't want to get a written invitation to come see us. Just for an example, my father was an appraiser. He retired 5 or 6 years ago. But right when we moved up the street, he came and toured the building. He said, "That's the last time I need to see that." And sure enough, I've worked there that long, and he lives here, and he's not been back. So, so it does kind of work that way. So I'm going to go over some just general report kind of numbers that I've typically done when I report to this group on an annual basis, and then go over just a few things that have changed recently with the statute, and do have some information on appointments, and we'll talk about that. And then I'm going to let Tom just discuss enforcement briefly, and then we're certainly free to take a few questions as best we can. So in looking at the appraisal numbers, I talked to the group yesterday, and I was just a tad off, but we actually have exactly as of yesterday afternoon 3,600 licensees. So just on the dot, and 453 of those are trainees. So that's a fairly high number. Just for an example, last year on the newsletter date, which was November 15th, we had 3,652, and 442 of those were trainees. So as you see, that number has not changed drastically. What typically happens, as you can imagine, we have retirees, deaths, whatever, that drop off at renewal time, and then over the year we kind of build it back up. So over the last several years, we've not seen a very substantial change. Looking back, one thing I noted to Tom yesterday, since August 31st, which is 7 weeks ago, we've added 62 licensees on all levels. So that is high. And 32 of those have been trainees. So we went from less trainees than we had a year ago to actually now having more. We've added 10 certified residential in that time, and 20 certified general in that time period. No licensed residentials. It hasn't changed across all the times that I've been there. I do expect we will start seeing licensed residentials given the new criteria change, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. I was talking about appointments. We did hear from the governor's office right before I left to go out of town last week to go to Aero. We did get 3 appointments for the appraisal board. David Reitzel, who is our AMC banking representative, has been reappointed to a 3-year term ending June 30th of 2022. Lynn Carmichael, who is a certified general from Buncombe County, was appointed to a 3-year term, again ending June 30th, 2022. And Claire Offrance, a certified general from Guilford County, was appointed to a 3-year term, also ending June 30th of 2022. And I'd be remiss not to thank Mr. Vincent here for his service to the board. He's been with us for 6 years. Doesn't seem quite that long. It just goes by fast. I know I just finished some service on a national board that I'd been doing for 9 years, and somebody said, "I can't believe you've been here 9 years." And it just rotates a lot faster, and there's certainly a lot that's gone on over the last 6 years. But we certainly thank Mr. Vincent and also Corey Gore, who I know is a member of this organization, and for their service the last 6 years. So. And we'll do something nicer for him than me just standing up here with a handheld microphone, but that's good. Want to recognize him in front of his peers here. So, a few other things just to go over real briefly. I don't want to eat up a lot of time, but as you know, we had new legislation that passed this session, this spring and summer. And it mainly revolved around changing the criteria for becoming registered, licensed, and certified. And the legislation just adopts what is now we referred to as the 2018 AQB criteria. So I thought for some of you who maybe you don't stay in tune to such things, or if you're already certified and it doesn't really matter to you anymore, other than just what's going on, I'd kind of explain a little bit what that means. For registered trainee now in North Carolina, ever since trainees started, which I believe was in the late 90s, we've had 90 hours of education required. And then when we went to the new criteria with the classes that are in principles, procedures, went away from the R1, 2, 3 model. Because we had 90 hours written in our law, we just went ahead and added one of the 15-hour courses for residential and kept it at 90 hours. And that way it didn't conflict with what was in the statute. Because we've adopted what is now the national criteria, we are at the 75 hours, which is what is in there is principles, procedures, and the 15-hour USPAC class. We did keep a North Carolina rule in effect that says those 75 hours do have to be taken in a classroom setting. So that is not required nationwide, but that's in North Carolina we've kept that. So that's the last little holdover for online, in class only. Licensed residential, some of you may remember in 2015 when the college degree program was put in for certified, we had retired the licensed category, but the legislature was not satisfied that there was no option for somebody with a associate's degree to get into the profession. So they reinstated the licensed category, but left everything else about it the same. In other words, the education, the experience all had to be the same as certified. The only difference was the college degree versus the 2-year degree, the 4-year degree versus 2-year degree, and you could take the licensed exam instead of the certified exam. I can tell you, I don't think we've had but one person that I'm aware of apply under that set of circumstances. So, and he was interested in becoming certified and got part of the way through the process and realized the only thing he qualified for was license. So he did not, he was coming from another state and didn't have a college degree, so that was it left him in that zone, and he's right now looking at how to move up, so give him the new criteria. Certified residential, this is probably the most interesting of all the categories. Let's go back to license just briefly. There's no college requirement now for license. You do have to have, for all the categories, a high school diploma or equivalent, which the legislature left in. And you have to have the 150 hours that are mandated by the AQB to be licensed, and 1,000 hours of experience over a minimum period of 6 months. So, and if you think about it, 1,000 hours in 6 months is that's figuring right at a 40-hour week, because it'd be 25 weeks at 40 hours. So that puts you right at the 6-month time. In looking at certified residential, the education jumps up to 200 hours and 1,500 hours over a minimum of 12 months, which had been 2,500 over 24 months. I can tell you that I've sat in on a lot of meetings as to how this was all, this was exposed a lot, discussed a lot. Probably the same, we'd probably have the same reaction if we went around this room as to who thinks it's a good idea, who thinks they're bad ideas. But I mean, that was, but I know when they first did the 4-year degree in 2015, I was amazed there was very little pushback. The pushback came when we started to implement it. So we started having problems once people realized they were shut out. And so that's when everybody had to come back to the table and they took a relook at it. But the college degree part of this is like I said, the qualifying ed is the same, the state exam is the same, the experience time has shrunk somewhat, but the big thing is the college degree. You can still have a 4-year degree in any field of study, which qualifies you. You can have an associate's degree in one of the following 5 disciplines: business administration, accounting, finance, economics, or real estate. So if you have a 2-year degree in one of those categories, you qualify. You can also have 30 hours of college level courses, if you remember, those of you who've been around a while, in lieu of category. And it's made up, and I won't read them all to you, but such as English composition, micro and macroeconomics, finance, algebra. So if you don't have one of these disciplines that I mentioned, but you have these courses, you can still qualify. And what we find, I was talking to a person just this week, they have like 8 of these, and so now their path forward is probably to take two more courses on this list at a community college. So that would allow them to progress. And then there's also, you can take college level exams to place out of courses, and if you get those passing scores, you can substitute that in for any of these the 10 courses. But that's, all that's on the website, and you can combine those in any way. So the courses and the testing out, you just have to get those 30 semester hours of those specific topics. And then finally, the biggest one that I think probably opens the door the most is that in lieu of college at all, if you are a licensed appraiser for a period of at least 5 years without any disciplinary actions, then you can qualify to upgrade through just experience only as a licensed person. So I do think that may be why we're seeing more people now signing up, because there is a path forward. When after 2015, when we didn't have any way to move up except with a 4-year degree, there were a lot of people that would not even pursue the trainee level. And then some people had just frozen as a trainee and said, well, I'll be like an office assistant from now on. So, but that's it in a nutshell. The general stayed the same, with the exception of still have to have 3,000 hours of experience, but it's now 18 months minimum instead of 30 months minimum. So you can do it, and again, if you look at that 3,000 hours, that equates to 40 hours a week. So that makes sense. The only place they didn't do that was on the residential. They did 1,500 over a year, and it looks like 2,000 would have been the magic number to just been consistent, but that was not my call. So just let you know where that ended up. But all the courses, the appraisal classes for all the different levels have remained the same, and the only difference is in the license category, we have now gone to the national requirement rather than having a higher standard for license. In looking at, somebody asked me yesterday about shortage of appraisers. And I said that locally, Tom and I don't think we believe we've seen anything that indicates a statewide problem. North Carolina is fortunate that we, any place in our state is not that far from a population center. I mean, where you have, I think a lot of people would question whether you should even go, an hour away. But I mean, if you take an hour, hour and a half from any major population center, we do have some coverage. Some states, as North Dakota being one, they don't have people there, so much less appraisers. And then so if somebody's living in this, area, they're gonna have a hard time. And I think they convinced people that there was a right for somebody to, no matter where you live, be able to get an appraisal in X days for X dollars. And, I don't think you can get a plumber in X days for X dollars, or anybody else if you have to travel that far kind of off the grid. So, but as I mentioned yesterday, the waiver was for only a year, and because of the change in the de minimis, it actually has now been shortened to it either times out in late November or early December. So the year has even been shortened based on the terms of the extension. A couple other items I'll mention briefly, and I'll turn it over to Tom, and like I said, I'll be glad to answer any questions at the end. In talking about a shortage, the foundation publishes how many people have taken the exam, first-time test takers. And they found that to be the most credible statistic, because some people take it 5, 6 times. So that doesn't tell you much about how the test is operating or how many new people are taking it. In 2015, there were 973 people that took all 3 exams, licensed, certified residential, certified general. In 2016, it went up to 984, 2017, 1172, 2018, 1459, and as of the middle of 2019, they're on pace for 1,712 people to take it in. So even though those don't sound like really big numbers, you see that in the last 5 years, it's pretty much doubled in people taking the test. And I do think that's because, as you notice, we're a little late to the party. The AQB criteria went into effect for anybody that already had it written into their statute to follow AQB in May of 18. So I think people are seeing opportunity there to progress, and so therefore we're seeing that number move up. And just also on the national level, there are 2 exposures or concept papers out from the foundation right now. If you go on their website, one is by the ASB, and for those of you that don't know, Ms. Willette, who was our former legal counsel, is now a member of the ASB, so we get a chance to heckle her a little bit. And but they have a concept paper out on evaluation standards in NCPAC. So what they're looking at is evaluations in most states, but definitely in ours. If you read what an evaluation is, it's a value opinion. And a value opinion is an appraisal. Well, the ASB has come out and said you can do an evaluation in compliance with NCPAC. What you're basically doing is a restricted use appraisal report. There seems to be some question whether that's what the lenders want. And so they are looking at, do they need to have a definition for an evaluation that's different from an appraisal, and also have maybe a standard, what might be at standard 11 and 12, for how to develop and report such a evaluation. And I know a lot of people say, well, there's something else going to cut into the appraiser. I don't think that's their goal here. I think the goal is the people that are really being shut out the most are the appraiser. They're not being allowed to do these because of this misconception that if you're doing an appraisal, that's not what the lender wants. And we do, people call from time to time, they say, You know, I've heard somebody's doing an evaluation and they're not an appraiser. You know, send it in. We'll do, you know, we'll send them at a minimum, we'll send them a letter and says it appears you're in violation of the law. Once we get them their attention, then we could possibly take them to court to try to stop it. Again, you have to wonder how hard a judge is gonna go after it, but we have to tell them to stop before we can do anything. So that's why I say, let us know if you have such a, if you run across one. People just, there's a lot of hearsay, you know, I've heard there's one, or I've seen there's one, you know, do send it in and let us, take a look at it. But I do think what they're trying to do is clear up, you know, if there are things in USPAP now that are problematic for the lending community in doing an evaluation, you know, how do we do that so that keep as much of USPAP in compliance? I mean, if it's the certification, if it's, you know, whatever, can one or two items be tweaked to leave it in? But right now, as there was a national, I will advise you of this, there was a national hearing on this last week at the ASB meeting. They had three panels of five, I think, or four. 3 panels of 4 that had lenders, regulators, and appraisal organizations. So they had those 3 groups in panels of 4, kind of like if you've ever watched C-SPAN and they do a congressional panel and they're asking questions. And it was very interesting to hear some of the answers, because some of them were not exactly what I expected to hear. But you can go on the foundation's website or YouTube page, and that will, I don't know if it's up yet because it was just last Friday, but they will be putting it up and you'll be able to watch that. And it's very good to just see, you know, what the discussion is about. And they said over and over they've not made any decision that they're going to do this. If people think it's a bad idea, you need to let them know. But it's also a possibility going forward that's. And I think they're really, because I asked the chair after the meeting, I said, have you heard people say that lenders will not accept a restricted use appraisal done as an evaluation? And he said, I can't find a straight answer to that. So that is, we've heard that. I mean, we've heard that at our level, that the lender will not take an appraisal because it creates different underwriting problems for them. And so trying to paint the picture at a very high level. So if you have any specific questions, I'll try to discuss it. But that is, what we're hearing a little bit.
I got a question.
Sure.
I've been out of banking 3 years. I was with a couple of banks in the last decade. The last time I looked at the FDIC regs, banks could not lend on a restricted use appraisal, period, in the sentence.
Okay.
The only time they could use an evaluation, and if it met USPAP standards, they could use it, was to renew outstanding credits that were, had ballooned and needed renewal for another term.
Right.
But unless they change that reg, the banks are asking for evaluations on new money. I mean, it's in direct conflict with the FDIC.
Well, and that discussion
Yeah.
was also part of this
Yeah.
hearing. Is nobody acknowledged that they're taking them for new money, even though we've heard that may be the case.
I've heard
But
that.
but what I'm saying is, everybody that was testifying from the lenders was talking about portfolio management or, renewing and I've been in several things where they say, look, if it was worth $1 million when we loaned on it, we're not worried about it if it's worth 4 now, we just wanna know is it still worth 1.
Right.
And that's what an evaluation that's the idea behind one, is to kind of give you that, that comfort level. So, but I mean, you're saying exactly what I think's in question is when can an evaluation be used? Obviously, with changes to de minimis and anything like that, all those rules could end up getting tweaked. So, but that is, I'm just trying to, again, let you know what's being discussed, and I don't think anything's finalized. I think it's regulators and even the foundation and everybody trying to to create rules and standards. Our biggest service to as the board, why this was all set up to start with the fire is because of the banks. And so when the banks are changing what they're doing, then obviously we have no choice to try to react to what comes down the pipe. So I know, sometimes we want to act like, well, let's get out front, or let's be, let North Carolina lead the way, or what. Sometimes you do have to kind of wait and see what's going to happen before you make an unintended consequence. So, and finally, going to the other side of the table, the AQB. Some of you may have heard what is called the, what is the term they like to use? The Practical Applications for Real Estate Appraisers, and they refer to it as PREA. And they have put an open invitation to anybody that can come up with a name that does not sound like some sort of disease. But what it would be is a way to gain experience in a virtual format, and not the traditional supervisor method. Again, you're talking these states that have very few population-wise, and it would be a best example would be like a lab in college or something where you would do a real assignment, but everything would be virtual data, virtual inspections, things like that. That is the AQB is working on that now. What they would like to do is to develop the model to the level that they could distribute it to providers, and then people could, you would have what they call a mentor. Again, they're trying to separate what's a class versus what's, so they don't want to use the word supervisor, they don't want to use the word instructor, so mentor is kind of where it looks like the word's going to be right now. But it would be somebody provided by the sponsor of the program. So, and right now, the discussion is that if this does come to fruition, how much experience would you be able to get? I can tell you right now, they're leaning at allowing states to allow up to 100%. And the reason being is if you get 50% and you couldn't get a supervisor to begin with, how are you going to get one now? So I mean, that is and I understand that argument. One point that we're thinking about maybe recommending is if you could get licensed based on this experience, but you had to submit actual work experience to get certified. So that would be kind of some way to, because there's more of a limit on what a licensed person can do, and therefore that would kind of handle both issues. That person could then work as a non-trainee in order to get that final experience to show they qualified to be certified. So that's a possibility. Again, both these groups, these boards are taking comments, so it's certainly whether your group as a whole would like to put something forward or individually and I've known enough people that have been on these boards, they read them all. So if you think you're just a local appraiser in whatever county in North Carolina, they won't read yours, they will. So and they don't go with the majority opinion every time. If there's a solid opinion made that kind of rules the day, they will go in that direction. So right now I'm going to let Tom come up and talk a little bit about enforcement, and then we'll take any general questions you may have.
Always feels weird. I feel like I should sing or something, but I promise you don't want to hear that. Speaking of singing, Dana Murray.
Yes, sir.
December 14th, Army versus Navy. And Dana promised me yesterday if Army wins, he's going to sing the Army song next time I come in here to speak to you. You remember that?
I do not.
Okay. All right, I might have taken a little liberty
I
there.
have drinks.
Anyway, Don, thank you for introducing me earlier. For those of you that don't know me, again, my name's Tom Lewis. Some of you I've probably met before. I've been with the board now about 15 years, And I won't go into too much detail about my background. I probably said some of this yesterday. I wanted to talk to you primarily about enforcement and the board's, in particular, investigations and enforcement. Investigations are part of the board's enforcement program. I work very closely with our new attorney, Sandra Panico, who is an assistant attorney general that I think Don mentioned yesterday. We share her services with, I think it's the psychology board. We have her in our office a couple days a week. She's so far doing a great job. It took me forever to train Roberta, so I'm working on Sandra right now, training her as well. I'm just kidding, but I think we're very fortunate to have her. And of course, you know, we miss Roberta. I learned a lot from her. I'm glad to see that she's staying involved in the appraisal profession and going on to serve on the standards board. I'm sure she's doing a great job there. I've heard a lot of good things about her participation. And of course, we miss her. When Roberta departed, you know, understanding that Roberta was a full-time staff person there with the board, we had to sort of look at what her obligations, what her duties were. We made some adjustments. And of course, understanding that we have Sandra only coming in part-time. So Don, in my position, some of the things, our task kind of grew, our task list grew quite a bit when Roberta left. So we're still adjusting to that. On the enforcement side, as I mentioned, we have Sandra as our Assistant Attorney General. We also have two other investigators, Jeff Davison, Gene Jordan. I think between the three of us, we probably have over 70 years of appraisal experience combined. And honestly, I'm the least experienced out of all three of us. I do happen to be a certified general appraiser. And so is Gene. Gene Jordan is a certified general appraiser, and then Jeff is a certified residential appraiser. We have a fairly robust investigations section and mission. I did run some numbers for you guys. I wanted to hit those with you real quick. And I went back and I looked at the last 11 years. In the last 11 years, the board has received over 1,500 complaints. On average, we've averaged about 128 complaints a month. I'm sorry, a year. Did I say a month? I'm sorry, y'all. A year. I meant a year. That sounds really bad. A month. Yeah, 128 a year. Thank you. The most we ever received was around 271 complaints, and that was during the 2009 time frame. And the least number of complaints is where we are right now. Our current year, 2019, we're sitting on 60 complaints, which is the lowest number we've ever received. Of course, we have a couple more months. I don't anticipate us exceeding over 70 complaints just based on past history. Typically, you know, another question I'll get is, you know, where do your complaints come from? In North Carolina, it has always historically been that consumers are the largest source of complaints in our state. I've talked to a lot of other jurisdictions through my participation in the Association of Appraiser Regulatory Officials, and that seems pretty common across the country. And I did some numbers based on our current year. And right now, of the 60 complaints that we've had, 78% of them are consumer complaints, with the other larger portion coming from real estate professionals such as real estate brokers, followed by other appraisers, actually, which I like to refer to as appraiser on appraiser crime. And then we have a smaller percentage, maybe 3%, that have come from the board. The board doesn't typically open a lot of complaints. We will, you know, do that when we feel like we're in the process of an investigation. We come across something that is just something that seems to be significant that we need to address. We'll go to the board and get permission to investigate, and then we'll open up a complaint based on that. The other side of the house, our AMC licensees, just to kind of give you an idea, I went back to 2011, which we started actually conducting investigations on complaints against AMCs. It looks like we have had a total of 119 complaints total, and that goes all the way back to 2011. We're averaging about 13 a year. The most complaints we ever received were 25 in 1 year, and that goes back to, I believe it was 2017, 2012. AMC complaints, just to give you a little bit of information about those, as you can imagine, primarily the complaint source for AMC complaints is appraisers, and predominantly those complaints have been about late payment. And the board has tried to deal with those in the most appropriate manner that they can. We even go as far as to set up systems where we monitor AMCs. We have them send their records to us periodically so that we can verify that they are paying our licensees within the 30-day required time period as they're supposed to. You know, probably the most, I guess I could say the most infamous AMC that we've dealt with in the last 2 or 3 years has been coaster evaluation. I'm sure everybody's familiar with coaster. I see a lot of heads shaking and maybe some cussing under the breath. You know, I understand that. You know, as you know, the board did take action against coaster, summarily suspended them. From what I understand, they are not operating in any jurisdiction that I'm aware of. I believe they shuttered their business. I'm not sure what Mr. Coaster's gone on to do.
Real estate.
Probably. I don't even know what to say to that, but that's sorry. But anyway, yeah, that's a shame. But I think you know, based on their past performance, I think the state we're good to be rid of them. Other things that I could tell you about enforcement and investigation. One of the things that we really strive for is to try to give the board the best information possible, the most accurate information, so that they can make an appropriate decision. The investigator, when we're out there in the field working, when we're talking to the respondent, the complainant, when we're actually preparing our findings, we do it in an objective, unbiased manner. We don't allow our own emotions to get involved in the case, and we don't allow our best practice, our considerations of best practice to get involved in the case. We investigate strictly for those matters that are standards, rules, and law, and that's it. I hope if you've ever had experience dealing with anyone on the investigation side at the board, that I can't say it's been a wonderful experience, but I hope you felt like you were treated fairly, because that is the goal, is we want to treat you fairly. We want to try to make sure that due process is afforded to not only you as a respondent, if you should ever have a complaint filed against you, but we also want to make sure the complainant feels as if due process is being served for them, making sure that they feel like they're being heard, that we have taken the opportunity to speak with them, to confirm the information that they've given, and also treat the respondent well. North Carolina is one of the few states where we actually send our investigators out in the field. A lot of jurisdictions don't have the resources or the ability to do that. We've always done that in North Carolina. There is a forensic aspect to the work that we do as investigators for the board. We try to mirror the scope of work that is being used by the licensee. If your scope of work called for you to go out and actually perform a physical observation of the subject property, then that's what we're going to do as investigators. We're going to essentially walk behind you and try to complete the same action that you would have taken when you were performing the appraisal. And that, in our minds, is the fairest way to do it. After all, when we're there, we can see all the things that you saw, we can smell the smells, hear the noises, everything that you did when you were out there on the property. And now, because of technology and the way that things are changing, one of the challenges for us in enforcement investigations is we're going to have to start looking at the way our process works. Because as you know, things are changing radically in our profession right now. There are new products that are being offered out there. There are alternative appraisal methodologies being utilized. I think y'all had a class yesterday, if I'm not mistaken, a lot about technology. I mean, did you ever think this business was going to go in that direction? I mean, some of us probably saw this coming, but it's here and it's happening right now. And I think we're all having to adjust to that, even for us on the regulatory side. We're looking at that as well. So we're going to be changing the way that we do business in some respects, because we want to make sure that we're mirroring what you're doing out in the field. Does anybody have any specific questions about investigation, enforcement? I'll be happy to talk to you about that. I can't go into specifics about any certain cases or anything, but I'll be happy to talk to you in generalities. Yes, sir.
Tom, as I travel around, I notice there's so much difference between one state to the next regarding the, I would say, the penalties that are given to the appraiser. Is there a possibility of getting that more or less universal throughout all the United States? And North Carolina's always been a leader in so many of the things that the other states are doing, and I was just wondering if you have any input on that?
Well, thank you for that question, first of all, and let me just say, when I'm talking about this, understand I'm speaking as Tom Lewis of investigation, and that's it. I'm not, speaking on behalf of the board or even Don in this regard, but let me just say that, we recognize that, and we hear a lot about that, especially when we go to national conferences. I know a lot of the professional appraiser groups are concerned about that, because there is this feeling in one jurisdiction, especially for individuals that are practicing over multiple jurisdictions. In one jurisdiction, you might get a very light penalty as opposed to another jurisdiction where it could be revocation or it could be severe fines. Yeah, we're aware of that. And let me just say, from the standpoint of North Carolina taking the lead, in some respects we've done that. Matter of fact, some of our staff was very involved in the voluntary sanction matrix that the Appraisal Foundation developed. And this was several years back. It's a document that they made available to multiple jurisdictions, to all the jurisdictions actually, where it gave a list of certain penalties and proposed sanctions and aggravating and mitigating circumstances. To answer your question, yes, we are involved in that. We are concerned about it. We've tried to participate as much as possible with the foundation to kind of foster that mentality of being able to have systematic and consistent enforcement across the United States. But I will tell you, when it all comes down to, in some respects, it's states' rights. I can't really find fault with North Carolina if North Carolina feels like a certain penalty should require this sanction, and maybe it is severe, but that's the way this state looks at it. That's the way they feel about it. And it's a balance. I think it's going to be a real challenge to try to do something like that, because I think a lot of states feel that way.
I mean, we've all heard of a hanging judge. I mean, it's somebody that's a more of a disciplinarian than others. Other thing you have to consider is all states don't have the same tool belt when it comes to sanction. And for example, in North Carolina, we cannot fine an appraiser. We can fine an AMC, but we can't fine an appraiser. It's just the way the statute is set up. Many states can fine, so they end up with a small named sanction, maybe something like some sort of warning or reprimand or censure with a big fine. And we're more of maybe a 1 month suspension, inactive suspension, trying to get to basically the same level of, where you are. Also, you have different makeups of boards. So you end up, and we've seen that in our time, Tom and I, that you get a board that's extremely strict on certain things. I mean, they find those as being misleading or basically lying to the client, and they treat that very, very, as an ethics violation and hit it very hard. Others maybe look at it more in the light of, I understand how this happened, and it doesn't necessarily strike me as ethics. I mean, in other words, I can see how they did it and not intend to be misleading. So you do see some ebb and flow there, but I think the biggest thing why I don't think we'll ever get it smooth across the board is because you don't have, everybody's not operating with the same sanction.
I think you're absolutely right about that, and I'll say one thing too that I've even witnessed here in our state. Coming on when I did 15 years ago, the board that I worked for then is a much different board than the board that I serve now. North Carolina had a reputation across the country for the longest time of being very punitive. We were called, there were certain states that were called, this is the education state. Well, North Carolina was called the revocation state. Now, this was a long time ago. Now, what I have seen is the makeup of the board change, the demeanor of the board, the mood of the board So we've become much more of an education board. And I think it's to the board's credit for doing that. I think that's a positive thing. But I've seen them go more towards remedial training, more towards education, and away from that punitive, hang 'em high type attitude that might have been in place a long time ago. And I think that's, again, to the credit of the board. I think it's a benefit for all of us licensees, including myself, because I'm a licensee as well.
One other thing on that note, it's not just what shifted with, just personalities on the board. And it's not as simple as that. The one thing I think you probably noticed, especially those of you who've been around since licensure started or sometime in the 90s, is used to, if you got a reprimand or even if you got a short suspension, you could survive that. Now the way the model is set up with lenders and with appraisal management companies, it's very possible that even a reprimand sinks your career totally. So, we, as the board, had to look at it, staff had to discuss it, is if education will remedy this problem, in other words, if it's a competency issue and it's not just so egregious that the person has no idea what they're doing, they just missed it. Then most of you now know that we give out a lot of conditional dismissals, kind of like a PJC in court, where you take this course and then the case is dismissed based on you taking that class. I will tell you that has become very popular nationwide, and North Carolina was one of the first states doing it. But that has tried to get some of these, what I'd call small violations, to not be so punitive that it cost the appraisal. I've told people at these national conventions, if we had intended for them not to work at all, we would have took their license. But yet they've taken something that we made as a reprimand or a correction and turned it into a revocation by not hiring them.
Don, when you do that, after they take the class, do you expunge the record of the grievance?
We don't really have expungement,
Okay.
but we have if you get a conditional dismissal, if somebody contacts us and asks, let's say that's the only interaction you've ever had with us, and ask if you've had a disciplinary action, the answer is no. Now, if they say, has he ever had a complaint, then the answer is yes. Yeah. And so I get in this discussion. I know Dwight's smiling because we had every time we get new board members, this comes up because this is an issue that is near and dear to everybody. The problem is that one of the big issues with complaints, just named complaints, is E&O, because it affects when you go to get E&O how many complaints have you had. And people say, well, that's not fair. I've had 3 complaints but no disciplinary actions. How can they use that against me? Well, when you get your car insurance and they say how many accidents have you had, and none of them were your fault, but yet they're going to either raise your rate or drop you, they're looking at risk. And the fact that you get in that, maybe you're just working for the wrong clients. I mean, I've had an E&O person tell me that, or maybe, this is a term that I probably shouldn't use, but
go ahead.
But appraisers aren't known sometimes for having the best bedside manner.
Oh.
And so if you challenge them, like the client challenges the appraiser, how many times have I heard this in 20 years is, I called the appraiser and wanted to talk to him about the appraisal, and he said he didn't have to talk to me and hung up.
More times than you can imagine.
Yeah, that's very common. Well, I mean, we all know that the client is the lender in most cases, and there is restrictions on how much you can talk to the borrower. However, 5 minutes of politely explaining the process versus I don't have to talk to you and hanging up that would probably prevent several complaints. I would say a year. So
it can help.
I mean, now sometimes they're just mad and they're not going to be satisfied and they're going to go all the way out. But I have heard many that just because of how they were dealt with, when they contacted the appraiser, turned into a complaint. And I don't see anybody in here that I think that's a problem with, but I mean, but you know, it does happen, and I mean, and I know that as many of you, I know many of you in the room know people like what I'm talking about, that just, they, you know, the first thing you challenge, they bristle and they're gonna fight back. And
Jamie's
so,
giving us the hook. I think we gotta get out of here.
you got a bigger name here, so.
Try to keep a schedule, and if we continue, particularly there's a few people here, if we get into them, we'll be here till 5 o'clock, and I want to be respectful of our time.
Absolutely. Let me say one thing, and then if it's all right with Don, we'll leave. But understand the staff, we are accessible to you. If you have a question, concern, you're welcome to contact us. You have an appraisal issue, we can talk to you about it. I'll be honest with you, we can't tell you how to do an assignment, but we can a lot of times tell you what not to do, okay? But we are accessible to you. We appreciate, you know, speaking with you at any time. You know, that's one of the things that I think sets us apart from a lot of other jurisdictions, is that we do have a staff that's capable of talking to their licensees. There's a lot of people I hear from in different jurisdictions, they call the board office and they don't even talk to a person. They can't get a hold of anybody. But we are there, okay? Thank you. I know we do need to.
Don, could you tell us the status of the new computer system that is supposed to have our renewals online at some point?
We are still on pace that it should be done for next year. That's about as much as my technology. And before I leave, I want you to know, this gentleman sitting in front of me is a local legend around the Raleigh area. We see him on the news quite often, and as an NC State graduate, we're very proud that he represents the university. So I don't want to steal your thunder and introduce him.
Of course, he's referring to.
I was a little unnerved when I saw him sitting there.
He's referring to Dr. Mike Walton. We need to do a quick bathroom break, 3 or 4 minutes, and then I'll introduce him, and we'll get the show going. I want to thank both of you for coming. It's always a pleasure. I really appreciate it.
I will publicly accept the Army-Navy challenge. With one stipulation. You lose, you're gonna be singing.
Nice to see you.